Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Zing and I'm the founder and host of Empathy Gaps, an online YouTube video podcast. Welcome to episode 16. Mental health and physical health are intricately connected. People with chronic physical health conditions are more likely to develop mental health disorders such as depression, whereas people with mental health disorders are more likely to develop physical health problems such as stroke or heart disease. In this episode, Alicia and I will discuss the connection between mental health and physical health, the difference in stigma between mental health and physical health, and daily practices we can incorporate in our lives to heal. Here is my conversation with her. Hi everyone, and welcome to Empathy Gaps, an online video podcast focused on creating a safe space to discuss mental health and psychology. I'm Tiffany Zing, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Alicia Shipman. Alicia Shipman is a clinical manager at evolvedMD, an organization striving to integrate behavioral health services in primary care. She is also the founder of Lish Wellness, a center providing accessible and empowering therapy. Alicia, thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to join me. Before we start, is there anything else that you want to add regarding to what you do and who you are?
No, I mean, I would just add that I'm also a mom to two kiddos, married, and I'm also a dog mom too, and an avid outdoor enthusiast. But yeah, no, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no problem. So, how did your kind of journey in mental health care start?
Yeah, so I never knew that this was what I wanted to do until something happened in my family, right? So I think that is how a lot of people enter the mental health field and space, from what I gather when I've worked among others. So I lost my dad. He died by suicide when I was 15. And that really shaped how I thought, about people and their mental health. And it kind of produced this trajectory. And then when I went to the University of Missouri, so not a lot of people in Arizona know about that, but go Mizzou Tigers, I loved it. And when I went there to college, I took a social work course. And I think that's when I really clicked to, like, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to, and I didn't know in what capacity. I thought maybe I would do it on a macro scale with working in nonprofits and mental health. So I wasn't quite sure, but that's kind of where it started. And then from there, I had a laser eye focus. Like, I need to get my master's in social work. I want to have my LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker, so I can do a lot of things. And that's the neat part about social work, is like, you can do it on a macro level, you can do it on a micro level, working with individuals doing therapy. So I've done lots of different things. And like you mentioned, I have my own private practice, so I still like doing the individual therapy too. But I'm doing some really fun stuff and exciting things with evolvedMD, being a clinical manager, and I love that. So that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience. I think talking to a lot of people and asking them kind of like how they started their mental health career, I think a lot of people also started it from like a loss of a loved one. I know that's kind of how I started as well. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that it obviously wasn't easy to deal with like the grief and also coping, but then how did you kind of navigate your journey of like from feeling overwhelmed and trauma to finding like meaning and like bouncing back? Because it seems like you've done a lot of work with like Evolved MD and like Lish Wellness.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that question. Yeah, I think I realized early on that there's two roads, right? Like, okay, I can either make meaning out of this loss, or I can totally go the other side and like not, kind of rebel. And I did maybe a little bit of that, I would say, but helped me a lot is, at the time, my mom put me into therapy like right away. And I think at that time, I'm going to display my age here, but I was born in 1987. So this is like, this is right around, um, I'm trying to think of the year, but we're talking, 90s, early 2000s, probably around early 2000s. Mental health there was still a lot of stigma about it. So I'm so thankful that my mom put me into therapy, right? It was not even a question. Like, you're going to go to a therapist, you're going to see her weekly, and we'll see what happens. And so that therapist, I could still remember her name to this day. She's retired now. I saw her for a long time until I went to college, right? So probably about 3 years. And that helped immensely. So I'm a big fan, obviously, of therapy and early intervention, right? So I think my mom knew even before she saw me struggling, like she's going to need this. And there was things that my mom couldn't provide to me because she was also deep in her grief. And so I think I realized early on, like, I can't just rely on her. She's going through her own stuff. And so I consistently went to my therapist. And I also had really good community supports at that time, right? Like I had a really good church group and really good friends that were really supportive. And so I think that that helped a lot. But I was constantly curious. And I think that that's something that we have to be with ourselves, right? Non-judgmental, just constantly curious, right? So if like I would act out in a way, I'm like, I'm curious, like I just always had that curiosity about like my mind and what was going on with me emotionally. And I wanted to investigate it. And so I did that a lot with my therapist, right? Like, what does this mean? Why am I feeling this way? Because they didn't teach that in schools. I didn't know. I had no idea. My mom, she wasn't a mental health therapist, so she had no idea how to teach me these skills. So I think my therapist really helped me be curious about what was going on with my grief and what was going on with my behaviors, right? Because when my dad died, I was 15. So that's like right smack dab, as you know, in the mental health field, that's a really hard age because it's adolescence. Our frontal lobe isn't developed. There's a lot of hormones going on, right? So it was like smack dab in the middle of a really hard season. And so I don't think if I didn't have that therapist and like the support, I don't know where I would be. And so I think that's where it was like, oh my gosh, having a therapist can make all the difference in the world, right? Because she really, really did, along with like my church and my community supports, that helped so much. And I think just like normalizing. I think if more people normalized what grief is and what trauma is, right? Because I had some secondary trauma, like my, I can talk about it now in a healthy way, but my dad died by suicide by using a gun, right? And so there was some trauma there associated with that. And then later on in life, I ended up doing EMDR. So that was like 3-4 years ago. I did EMDR around that because I really wanted to see if that would help some of the unresolved things. And it did. It helped so much, right? So those are just a few of the things that I've kind of, and I think doing work in this field and making meaning out of loss has helped so much because I can go into every day saying, I'm doing the work that hopefully can make a difference. And even if I only save one life, like that's better than not doing anything. Like I got to do something. I'm a doer. And so that helps me a lot. And being able to be at evolvedMD where they give me the chance to do that. And they give me the chance to do podcasts and write articles and do things like that's so amazing. I feel honored to be able to do it every day.
Mm-hmm. Of course, and something you said in your response kind of struck me. It was about like normalizing things. So, like, why do you think that there is like kind of a stigma surrounding mental health, like rather than physical health?
Yeah, well, I think it's hard, right? Because it's still a lot of mystery, right? Like in physical health, we can say, oh, you have a cut there, we need to stitch it up. But we can't necessarily say that for mental health, right? We can't take a blood draw and say, oh, you have depression. Oh, you have PTSD, right? So I think a lot of people struggle with that it's not concrete, right? Or there's still that stigma. It's getting better. I think since COVID, people are more educated. And I think more people experienced anxiety and depression and they realized, oh, it's not something you can just wish away, right? Like this is something serious, but I think it's not concrete. And so I think that's really hard for a lot of people to understand. And culturally, right, there's still a lot of cultures that I treat a lot of patients that come in and see me, or a lot of clients that come in and see me and say, well, I never learned about this because my family doesn't believe in that, right? They just think that you do X, Y, Z, and then you're fine, right? So there's a lot of things still like culturally that we have to work on. I think the more awareness we can get out, but normalizing it, right? And even with our children. So it starts super early intervention, right? Like I have two children that I mentioned. So I normalize everything. Oh, you're upset and you're super angry. Let's normalize that. It's normal to be angry, right? Because where a lot of the stigma comes into is the shame, feeling alone in it and shameful about our feelings. And that starts early as a tiny kid, right? We're talking like 0 to 3, telling your 2 year old, hey, it's okay, you're screaming. That's fine. Let's just be safe about it, right? Like normalize. So I try to do that with my own kids as much as possible.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I definitely think everyone should normalize mental health. And what kind of role do you think that like teaching mental health in schools could have on like normalizing mental health? Or like do you think that mental health should be like taught in schools?
Oh, I am a huge fan, right? Like if I could teach that and be in every school, I would love to do that. I would love that job. If I could like replicate myself and be there because it's so important. And I think some schools are already starting to do that, right? Like I don't know if anyone has heard of the SEL courses, so social emotional learning. But some schools have already started to implement that. So that's social awareness, like building empathy for others as well as having social awareness about your own emotional regulation. So I love seeing that when schools have that in place, right? I think that's beautiful. They're spending, maybe 15 minutes, half an hour on this every day. They got worksheets. It is so important, right? Because if we start to build empathy for others, awareness about our own emotion regulation, we could talk about like seeing a decrease in crime, seeing that early intervention is going to be so important, right? Because there are, and I've seen this personally, right? And at evolvedMD, patients come to us and they're in their 50s feeling like, gosh, why I've lost all my relationships with my friends and family and what's going on. And then come to find out, well, they have bipolar disorder. They have an undiagnosed mood disorder. And it's caused a lot of cycling and it causes them to lose their job. And maybe they've, done something else and had impulsive behaviors. But what if that was diagnosed when they were in their 20s? Right. And then they got early intervention, early therapy, early medication. Like I'm a huge fan, I can't say it enough, about doing all of the, social emotional learning, behavioral health learning in schools. I know parents can do it, but also not a lot of parents have that knowledge either. They were taught, right? So if you're now an architect and you didn't go to school for this, right? I breathe and live this every day. So my husband reminds me, right? Because he's like, you understand that. I don't. So that's hard for parents to teach their kids. They can try, but I think it really does need to be a structured curriculum in school and required. That's my opinion on that.
hmm Yeah, personally, my school, we do touch a little bit about mental health and stuff. In ninth grade, we have this class called like decisions and stuff, and that kind of touches a little bit on mental health. But yeah, I
Mhm.
do agree that it should be like a structured curriculum and also universal. And I feel like I've heard a lot of debate about like mental health having like AP courses and honors courses. I think that's a very interesting debate. Do you have like any particular thoughts on structuring the mental health curriculum like that?
I think, I mean, I don't know enough about that, having like AP courses. I would say, it's something I was talking to somebody who's a high schooler recently about this. And I think maybe if they do a broad, like you said, it should be universal where it's like we have a structured curriculum for ninth grade and 10th grade and 11th grade and 12th grade, because there's more complexity, right? Like maybe in 11th and 12th grade, they can start teaching cognitive behavioral therapy skills where you couldn't do that in sixth grade. But I think offering something like if you wanted to go in the mental health field, like offering externships or something like that, they do that with teachers, right? Where a ninth, 10th grader can go and teach along and be a TA. But why couldn't you do that if you wanted to be in the mental health therapy field? So I agree with that more than like an AP or somebody is like in an honors course for mental health. Like I that's kind of I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of wanted to pivot to your work at Evolved MD because I know Evolved MD has connections between like physical health and mental health. So, what kind of like is the connection between mental health and physical health? Like, is it possible to be like only physically healthy but not mentally healthy? Like, what is kind of the connection between these two healths?
Yeah. So I think when I started my work at evolvedMD, I feel like I learned so much about this, right? So I've been here 6 years, and they have taught me so much working in the primary care office alongside doctors and alongside um, Eric and Steve. Those are the guys that started evolvedMD, and they're just awesome, right? So I think I've learned so much about, you can't have one without the other, right? Like it doesn't exist. And so that's why we work alongside primary care doctors, because they're checking in on the physical health, right? And making sure your thyroid is good, and your hormone levels are good, and your everything else is going good, right? And your A1C is level and not too high and not too, and that's good. And so if those things are off, any one of those things, it can cause side effects, right? So like if your thyroid is let's say you have hypothyroidism, that's going to cause symptoms like feeling lethargic, feeling tired, feeling like it's hard to get out of bed. Well, people will come to therapists and say, can't get out of bed, I'm tired, I'm lethargic. And they're going to start to treat them for depression symptoms. Whereas the doctor can assess them and put them on hypothyroid medication, get those symptoms up, working with the therapist and their mental health, because those symptoms are real, right? But they work in conjunction with each other, right? So it's all intertwined. We can't say it's separate, right? And also we know depression, anxiety, PTSD does have effects on your physical health too, right? So if you're coming in and you're so anxious, you haven't slept in forever, right? And you're not eating, you're going to be underweight, your cortisol is going to be through the roof, right? I think there's a lot more science nowadays, which I love. And I'm a little bit of a science geek, right? Like I love the fact that we can actually see now, right? Like, oh, there's a spike in the chemicals, like the spike in cortisol that is causing stress. And we know that that's not good for your heart and for your body and for your cells in general, right? So there's such a connection. And I think more and more of the medical field is getting on board with that too, which is why we're embedded, evolvedMD is embedded in primary care offices. So you can go and see your primary care doctor, get your blood drawn, do your yearly exam, and then also go see your therapist in the same day, same office, because they can't live one without another.
Mm-hmm. Of course, yeah, I really like what you said about the connection between physical health and mental health. And I feel like a lot of people when they say, or at least in like my perspective, like I feel like when people say like, "Oh, I'm really healthy," I feel like they really mean like they mean physically healthy when that should also like encompass mental health as well. And yeah, I just really liked what you mentioned about the connection because I never really thought of it that way. And kind of going off of that, like what are kind of like the benefits of treating mental health and physical health together, and how does like I guess evolved MD help support that?
Yeah, so we're doing really cool things right now, tracking patient outcomes too. So something that we're looking at and consistently looking at, right, is okay, let's say if patients are coming in for depression, do we see a correlation between their A1C levels, right? Do their A1C levels start to drop if they are too high and they were diabetic, but now maybe they're going to be lowered to pre-diabetic levels, or maybe they're not going to be diabetic at all, right? Or a different correlation could be, high blood pressure, right? So there's a lot of these like health markers. And if they're getting treatment, we're tracking and looking at, okay, well, how much are their depression screening scores decreasing, right? First of all, we're doing a lot of work on that too. Like our model, it's called collaborative care. So we're looking at, okay, what's the response and remission rates, right? So remission of depression and anxiety, specifically looking at two screeners called PHQ-9 and GAD-7 scores. Not to get too into the details, but we're seeing really great data about that, right? About how much patients are starting their depression screening scores are starting to come down even after one or two visits, right? So I hope that kind of answers your question. We don't have all of the data. We're still continuously gathering data too. But I think a lot of the partners that we work with see value in treating the mental health too, because then their patients come back and they're saying, you know what, I am more motivated to take my medication. I am more motivated to exercise and be healthier, right? And like you mentioned, when doctors ask, are you feeling healthy? Are you feeling good? I think they're getting a lot better about it's not just, oh, have I lost weight? It is, are you doing self-care? Are you sleeping okay? It's all the behavioral health, right? Is your anger feeling better? Is it decreasing? Is it feeling regulated? Are you feeling emotionally regulated? Are you feeling connected to others, right? Like it's all of the behavioral health. It's not just, are you feeling healthy because physically you've been exercising,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, of course. That was such a perfect response to my question. And I kind of wanted to ask you, like, was there a moment in your journey of, I guess, like healing or working at Evolved MD in which you realized that physical and mental health like have to be treated together?
Yeah, I mean, I think having your own personal experience with it really helps, right? So, like I mentioned, I have two kids. And so with my first, I did struggle with postpartum depression and anxiety. And I think I realized a lot then, and that was early on in my career about, that was a little bit earlier. And I realized like that I have to be doing the walking, the taking care of myself, feeding myself really good foods, along with going to see my therapist and taking care of myself, right? And if I wasn't doing the other, right, like, and it's a lot, I get it, it's a lot to balance. But if I wasn't eating nutritious foods, or let's say, like in my case, I just wasn't eating enough, right? Like I was very stressed, it was very hard. Food didn't sound good to me. But if I wasn't doing that, and I wasn't taking my walks and getting outside and getting sunlight, my mood would be so much lower, right? So I started noticing like that extreme correlation. So I think, having pregnancies and dealing with that, like just things in life as they come up, right? It really helps to have that personal experience to see like, oh, I believed it before then, but I think it just really solidified. And I try to consistently keep a balance. Like I said, I love to hike and mountain bike, and I exercise daily. There's a lot of things that I do, and it takes a lot of motivation. Sometimes I feel like I don't want to do it, but I know at the end of the day, just like going to see my therapist, I tell her sometimes I don't want to come, but afterwards it feels so much better. And I think that's discipline, right? And that's hard to do. But if you establish habits, and Evolved MD is really big on this too, right? Doing habits and making sure we're trying to do things for 30 days and trying to make it more of a habit. And that's going to really help those habits stick.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for that response. I really liked your like personal story and stuff. So I just want to like thank you again for sharing that. And kind of like I we've heard so much about your story, and it seems like you've had a lot of experience, I guess, in the mental health field, obviously. Like, what are some daily practices that you did during your, I guess, like healing process that helped you move forward and that you would recommend to others?
Absolutely. So I think meditation and mindfulness is extremely overrated, like underrated, right? Like I started doing more of a meditation daily prayer practice. It doesn't have to be prayer, right? But just quiet time. There's so much pinging and noise and meetings and all of the things, even for people in high school and middle school, right? Even my daughter's in third grade, and sometimes she comes home and she's overstimulated, right? So it's just taking time to shut off the electronics, no noise, quiet, dark room. I listen to guided meditations, and I notice when I don't, right? Because then I'm more frazzled. And so that's one of the practices that has helped me so, so much. So I use an app called Insight Timer. It's free and I love it. And I like the ones that have background music. It's just calming. So if I do it for 5 or 10 minutes, I like to do quiet activities, right? Because I go, go, go a lot. And so I need to de-stimulate, right? So that means dark room. Maybe reading books is also something that's really helpful, like not on a screen, no blue light, right? Just a good old fashioned book. But also some meditation, reading, deep breathing is really underrated too. Learning how to use your breath and doing breath work is your tool. It's free, right? It's a free and beautiful and natural tool that you can utilize to switch your body from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system really fast. So I continuously will use that too if I feel like I'm having a lot of anxiety that day. or I have big things coming up at work. And I know that sounds so simple, but I think we need to go back to using things that are like, it doesn't have to be expensive, right? If you can't go to therapy right now, what are the things that you can do? Use a free app, like do yoga at home, do free breathing techniques on YouTube. There's a ton of, if you search for diaphragmatic breathing, there's a ton of YouTube videos that teach you and will walk you through it. Right. So I think especially for people that can't afford therapy right now, right, using some of those methods. But obviously, I think therapy is always processing a lot of things, because as humans, validation is a cornerstone of being a human being. And so if we're not getting a lot of that validation at work or at home, we need to seek therapy, right? Because it is so helpful as a human. I don't know if you've ever just like been through something hard or stressful. As soon as you tell the story and somebody validates it, it's like, like I feel better because I know, and internally it validates our experience as a human being. So validation and normalizing hugely important too. I hope that answers your question.
No, yeah, that was a perfect response. Yeah, I really believe that meditation is really underrated. I remember I once did like a bunch of research on meditation for like this mental health research paper, and yeah, like the things I read about meditation kind of inspired me to start meditating. So even though I'm like super busy, I do try to like make time for meditation, and as you said, like I've noticed a huge difference like when I do and when I don't. So,
Mhm.
and
Absolutely.
yeah, so thank you so much, Alicia, for coming on and speaking with me today. Thank you so much for all your responses and stuff. It was amazing. And are there any kind of like last word things that you want to say?
Yeah, so I would say I'm not sure, exactly, but hopefully this gets to some of your listeners. But I think if you are struggling, right, and you don't know if it's too soon to get help or you don't want to seem like you're complaining, right, just go talk to your primary care doctor. They're really knowledgeable. We partner up with a lot of the primary care offices in the Valley. And so we have a therapist in office that works with your primary care doctor, with most of them. So if you're unsure, right, I think therapy can be such a great tool, even if you're not, right, like in this terrible space, but you're just struggling a little bit. It's like I would say, I love the analogy of like the car tune up, right? Like our cars need oil changes or they need a tire fix. Like the oil change, it doesn't last forever, right? So we need to go in and tune up our car sometimes. And so, I do that from time to time with my therapist. She's great for that. So, maybe you just need a little bit of a tune up. And so, going and speaking with your doctor, calling 988 if it's more serious and it's the evening or weekend and you need to talk to somebody. 988 is a great resource and they can get you connected to a professional that can talk to you over the phone and make sure you get to the right place, right? So I'm big on this being Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. We got to make sure, right? We got to be more aware, talking to our friends. If you notice any of your friends or family are struggling, making sure you're talk about it, ask them about it, making sure you're there and providing support, just standing by them. I think the more that we talk about it, the less, the more shame it takes away from it all. So sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but
Oh, no worries. That was a really good response. But yeah,
yeah.
thank you so much, Alicia, once again. And I will see every one of my listeners next time.